Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Camila Sekowitz. I am the Executive Director of the ICA. I'm very glad you can join us here today for the ICA webinar on the next round of the new gTLD program. It is a major topic in our industry right now. It's generating a lot of discussion and momentum, especially as we get closer to the new application date. And we are excited to bring you insights from some of the most knowledgeable people in this space here today. Uh, just quickly, many of you joined us in person in Seattle just a few weeks ago. Thank you for joining us there. We're happy to see many of you rejoining us for the webinar, but whether you're returning for an ICA webinar or here for the first time, we're very happy that you're part of the conversation. For those of you who might be new to the ICA, we are a nonprofit trade organization that advocates on behalf of domain name owners, investors, developers, registrants, basically companies, other companies in the domain name space. We are member driven and focused on policy work that impacts the domain name space. If you're not a member yet, of course, we'd love to hear from you. I will add my email into the chat window. And now I'm excited to introduce our panelists. These will be brief introductions. Their CVs are extensive. They bring a lot of experience in this space to the table. So I'll do a quick introduction and they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves throughout the webinar. We'll start with Sophie Hey. She is the policy advisor at Com Laude, where she works closely with that brand and verified registries to represent their interests in ICANN policy development. She's been with Cum Laude since 2018 and played an active role in the SubPro PDP, the group that developed policy for the next round of gTLDs. Next, we have Tom Barrett. He is the founder and president of the registrars in Circa and Nameshare. He is also the founder of PW Registry Corp and is the admin contact for PW. He's also the founder of Altroots, which provides blockchain and digital identity services. Tom also serves on the board of Asia and is chair-elect of the ICANN nominating committee. And next, we have Jeff Neuman. He is the founder and CEO of his company, JJN Solution, and has more than 25 years of experience in the domain name industry. He is a leading voice in the internet governance and domain name policy. Jeff served as a co-chair on the SubPro PDP for the next round of gTLDs, and is also an active ICA member. And last, we have our moderator, Zak Muscovitch. To many of you, he needs no introduction. Zak is ICA's general counsel. He's been in the domain name industry for also over 25 years, brings many years of legal and strategic experience work, and we are very thankful for his work protecting domain registrants' rights. Before I turn it over to Zak, just a couple of housekeeping instructions. So if you'd like to ask a question, just type it into the chat window so that everybody can see it. I will read it out. I or Zak will read it out, and Zak will moderate the discussion. The call will be recorded or is being recorded already. I think that's it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Zak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camila, and thank you so much, Tom, Jeff, and Sophie for joining us today. You know, at the recent ICANN meeting in Seattle, there was a lot of buzz about the new gTLD round, and a lot of people are beginning to talk about it even more and take it very seriously. But not all of us have been as directly involved in the latest machinations and preparations as you all have. And so I thought it'd be really terrific if you could share your insights and experience with this group. And we have over 35 people today in the room, which is terrific, and many more will see it in the recording. And so the first question I have, really, Sophie, you serve on the SubPro. Actually, it's two questions, Sophie. The SubPro is the working group that is dealing with the next round. Why is it called SubPro? I've always wondered that, first of all. And secondly, maybe you could tell us where things are at in terms of the rollout of the new program. So what dates do we know? What pieces have been completed, what pieces remain? Give us like a big picture overview of where the program stands now, as far as we know.
Sure, I can do that. So first of all, your first question on why it's called SubPro. So the full name for the policy development working group that actually developed the policy for the next round was Subsequent Procedures for New gTLDs. And so obviously that's a little bit of a mouthful, so compressed down to SubPro. And again, I think as many of you are aware, the 2012 round of new gTLDs wasn't the first time. It's been succession going right back to the beginning of ICANN of increasing the route. Now, in terms of where we're at now, so at the moment, we're in the implementation stage. So we have the policy for what the next round is going to look like. That came from the SubPro PDP. Now we're in the IRT, so the implementation review team. And the primary task of that group is to support the drafting of the applicant guidebook, which are the rules for the next round. So there's been a few public comment periods over the last year or so. There's one that's going to close next week. And then at the end of May, the whole applicant guidebook is going to be out for public comment for people to review to make sure everything's consistent. So the key date, however, for this, for people who don't want to be involved in the weeds of it, is December 2025. That's when we're expecting that applicant guidebook to be finalised. So it's gone through the public comment period, input's been reviewed, and then the ICANN board has voted to adopt those rules. The application window itself, so again, big key date for people, is anticipated to be April Q2 2026. ICANN's saying at the moment for 12 to 15 weeks. So basically, we're looking at about 3 months, and the cost is going to be $227,000 at the moment per application. There's a couple of other programs that are currently open as part of the next round at the moment. So there's the Registry Services Provider Evaluation window. So that's open at the moment until the 20th of May. So that's an opportunity for RSPs to be evaluated ahead of the application window next year. And those that are successful will be listed on ICANN's site so that prospective applicants who might not want to run their own backend but still want to operate a registry can see and have an idea of some of the options that will be available. But the registry services, the RSPs, they can still be evaluated during the actual window in April next year. So to give an idea of the scope, the size at the moment, I understand there's about 44 applications for that in progress. The second part, this one is the applicant support program. So unlike last time, evaluation for eligibility isn't happening at the same time as the application for a gTLD. Eligibility to receive a discounted application is happening in advance. So that window is open until the 19th of November this year. And if an entity isn't successful in that evaluation, that doesn't prevent them from actually still applying for a gTLD at the full cost sorry, I've lost my phrasing. That doesn't prevent them from applying for a gTLD in the window at the full cost. So I'll stop there. Zach, is there anything else you needed me to cover in that?
Sophie, I think you covered everything. We could actually end the webinar right now. But no, that's a terrific overview, Sophie. Thanks so much. Jeff, I got a couple questions for you. One, Sophie mentioned the applicant guidebook. For those of us who are not as familiar with the process, could you just give, an overview of the centrality of the applicant guidebook in the process? And also maybe talk about some of the differences between this round and the previous round. Maybe it's, you can mention how the registry service provider system is working as well in your answer. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Zach, and thanks, everyone. I've had the pleasure of working with each of the other panelists in this group. For those of you who may not know, Tom and I worked together back in 2000 on newstars.biz, so we've been around for a while. So the first question of applicant guidebook, why is that so important? I kind of jokingly call this the Bible for new TLD applicants. It really has everything in there. It's all the rules about how to apply for and how to get through the whole applicant process for new TLDs. It's got everything, including eventually we'll have the final version of the registry agreement in there. It has the terms and conditions. So think of it as most people would say it's like a request for proposals. It's the full documentation of everything. And it's going to be about, I don't know, last count, someone said it's going to be about 300, 400 pages. So it's a fairly lengthy document because it goes into painstaking detail about the process and just everything you're going to have to do in order to be eligible for and apply for a new generic top-level domain. I think, at least in my mind, there's probably, well, at least 6 major kind of differences from the 2012 round. And one of them actually goes to your initial question: why the heck are we called, did we call it SubPro? And the title that Sophie gave, subsequent procedures for the next round. It's because, and this is the change number 1, it's not just intended for one new round. In other words, what Sophie talked about is the next round, and Sophie used that term for a reason, because this guidebook now envisions having multiple rounds with predictable time periods in between. Now, I can't tell you today whether that means that the next round would be in, what year that'll be, but there is a new policy that basically says you can't just stop the program pending this indeterminate period for reviews, that there needs to be a date set or criteria set for this next round, so that if you miss this window, you don't have to wait 14 years by the time this launches between rounds. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, in 2012, applicants were encouraged, if they were in a contention set, applicants were encouraged to privately resolve these contention sets amongst themselves. So if you had, and you did, 8 applicants for .web, or 10, I can't remember how many there were, you had the option of, trying to resolve that contention set between and amongst the applicants, which could have been through private auction. It could have been through negotiating, anything basically that results in everyone else dropping out. So a lot of companies, applicants may not have intended this at the beginning, but they made a lot of money off of private auctions. Some of these, contention sets that were resolved privately went for millions of dollars. And in fact, some applicants earned more money in private resolution of contention sets than they did for actually running the registries. In order to mitigate that from happening this next time, because it doesn't send a great message to the world that you're basically having this application process for critical infrastructure, but all these people are making money off of not winning the TLD. It just didn't sit right with governments around the world. So in this round, they have banned the private resolution of contention sets, which means no more private auctions. And it also means that if you're in a contention set till the end, it's going to be an ICANN auction, meaning there will still be an auction, but all the funds go to ICANN instead of being able to be divided by the applicants. The third thing that's different is now you're able to, when you apply, you're able to indicate a replacement string. So again, to try to reduce contention sets, what ICANN is now saying is you can put your main string in your application. Let's say it's .Neuman. But if it turns out that there's contention, you can also list an alternate string. So I could list .Jeff Neuman. So as if there's another applicant for .Neuman, which can't imagine why, but if there were, then I could elect to go to my alternate string. Whole bunch of rules about that. I won't get into the detail because it's like I said, there's a lot of complications around that. Like you can't create a new contention set, all these other things. I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards about it, but that's the third element. Fourth is as Sophie kind of described, there's in the last round, all applications were evaluated individually, including the technical portions. So a company like Newstar that I worked for at the time, we had 350 applications that we supported as a registry service provider, which meant Newstar had to be evaluated 350 separate times, which made absolutely no sense because essentially it was the same response for all 350. So by having this program that Sophie talked about, each technical provider only needs to be evaluated once. And then all you need to do when you apply is indicate, I'm going to use an approved or pre-evaluated registry service provider. You don't have to go through that analysis again. And then I think there are a couple others involving more technical portions. But I think I'll stop there because I think, I said there were 6. I covered 4. There are a few more, but
We're
very
rounding
weeds.
up to 6. That's okay,
Yeah.
Jeff. So Tom, I remember being in the room in Singapore when the last round was announced, 2012. It's been, as Jeff mentioned, I'm so bad at math, but I think that's 13 years since then. And we've seen a lot of new gTLDs delegated and operational. We've heard about some of the changes since the last round that Jeff mentioned. What would you say are some of the lessons that we've learned since the last round to now?
Thanks, Zach. And thanks everyone for joining today. I do have 3 lessons learned. First of all, I'll talk about string selection. And I'm trying to think of the perspective of your members who are investors in domain names, right? And so a few of your members obviously are shareholders, but most of them invest in the new TLDs by buying premium names or other names they believe have some resale value. So from that perspective, one of the first lessons learned is about string selection. There's certainly a lot of ICA members who applied in the last round, right? Donuts and Minds and Machines and others. And again, I don't have first-hand knowledge, but I think their string selection process was similar to how domainers select second-level names, right? You analyze search engine traffic for certain keywords, how popular certain strings seem to be. And the idea is that popularity at the second level would translate to the top level. And so my first lesson learned is that the SEO benefits promised with new TLDs did not materialize, right? The search engines, particularly Google, did not cooperate in adding any particular weight to the meaning of the TLD string. So that was the main benefit. The reason they sold these new TLDs, and that simply did not materialize. I'm going to stop there and see if Jeff or Sophie, you want to agree or disagree with that.
I mean, I'll just add, I think that's right. I think the last round was kind of the field of dreams for applicants, right? If we build it and if we build it, they'll come to us and they'll just buy names. And I think even by that point in 2012, when you had TLDs that were launched like .co and it's a CCTLD, but you had .co, .xxx, .travel, and some others. The demand for those, was going down, and so now I hope that the applications we get are, the people that apply are going to be more realistic as to what volumes they're going to achieve. And really, when they apply, will do more than just expect people to come to buy their TLD and expect registrars to do all your marketing for you, which they won't.
Thank you, Jeff. I have more questions, but Tom, do you want to carry on with the second and third?
Yeah, Sophie,
Yeah?
did you want to respond to that
Yeah.
before I proceed?
No, I don't want to add anything
Okay.
to that one. I think you both covered it very well.
So the second lesson learned, I want to talk about the inherent bias in the ICANN model. All right. So as like Jeff, I was around for the launch of Biz and Info. I was a founding member of Affiliates. And as you remember, 30 years ago, Network Solutions was the only game in town. That's where you went to buy domain names. They're both the front end and the back end. So ICANN essentially started to introduce competition to Network Solutions. So now we have hundreds of ICANN registrars. And then they introduced competition to .com, .net, and .org. So now we have hundreds of TLDs. But there's a code of conduct that every new registry operator needs to agree to that says you must utilize accredited registrars. So as a result, registrars become the de facto sales channel for new TLDs. But don't ask them to do any extra work, right? Very few, in fact, many of the registrars that the ICA members tend to use, they basically go to the registry operators of these new TLDs and say, look, it should operate, the user experience should be just like .com. Don't ask for any extra information, don't have any extra restrictions, make it flow just like .com. And so I'm going to pick on GoDaddy because they are the dominant market force in this industry. And so they've onboarded 425 of these new TLDs, which is a healthy number. Folks like Com Laude have done 586, CSC has done over 600. So the corporate registrars have done more TLDs, but the ones that domainers and ICA members typically use are around 425, same as GoDaddy. And they have 11% market share with the new TLDs. So I took a look at their 425 TLDs. The average is, say, 15,000, but the median, the midpoint of domains under management is 1,637 names. All right, that means there's over 200 TLDs where they've sold more. There's over 200 TLDs where they've sold less. And again, these 425 are mostly totally unrestricted TLDs, same sort of user flow as .com. So as you may well know, GoDaddy is starting to propose that they will charge an onboarding fee for the next round for every new TLD. And the reason is, I was told that of the hundreds of TLDs they onboarded from the last round, less than 2 dozen have recouped their onboarding fees. All right. So from a registrar perspective, we're all looking at this onboarding hundreds more of TLDs, most of which simply we're not going to recoup the expense of onboarding. So that's the registrar perspective. Let's talk about what a registry operator, how they might react when they look at this data. As a registry operator, first of all, if the median for the biggest registrar in the industry, the median is 1,600 names, that tells me, first of all, there's a lot of unsold inventory in this space. Right? I'm not sure I need another 400 unrestricted TLDs. Number two, it tells me, this is the biggest takeaway for me, it tells me that registrars were not the best sales channel for these TLDs. And this, if you remember how the TLDs rolled out, they had a sunrise period, then an early access period. So if you wanted to get a premium, you paid 10,000, 9,000, 8,000, and then it went to GA. There was no, if this was a vertical TLD, like for the legal industry, real estate, travel, there was no hint of participation from those target markets, zero. And so, and the sales channel would have been engage those target markets, find a trade association. Let's say, Dot Hospital. There's an American Hospital Association that has a relationship with every hospital in the country. They were not part of the rollout of Dot Hospital. And I'm just picking one out of hundreds of TLDs where the target market simply was not on board with the intended use of that TLD. So the takeaway for me is that registrars are not a great sales channel at all. And if you want to have a successful TLD, I would look for those who have partnered with their target community or industry. They have pioneer phases, or they have limited registration phases where they try to get names in the hands of their target market. So as a domainer, you want to be early, but you don't want to be alone, right? So I think that's what happened with the last round. We have too many TLDs where trademark owners and domainers scooped up a lot of names, but the target end users were just never brought on board. So that's kind of a lesson learned I would take away. Jeff, I saw you nodding your head. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Part of the problem is that you have to be registries have to use ICANN accredited registrars, and you're absolutely right. Would .hospital be better sold by the hospital association? The answer is yes. But those hospitals don't have the ability to become ICANN accredited, nor the desire to do that. So, anyone on this call that wants to make some money, build a good registrar in a box solution for these trade associations and others. There used to be some okay ones in the market, things like Logic Boxes and some others that got acquired by other registrars and simply discontinued. So, if anybody wants to do that, I've been looking around for .hip hop for a great, registrar in a box solution to give to organizations that just can't get ICANN accredited, or don't have the resources, or don't care to. And I see it nowhere. I've tried a lot of different solutions. Happy to work with anyone on this call on that kind of product, because I think that's what's needed for new registries that launch.
Thank you, Jeff and Tom. That's some fascinating insights and data that you provided. I want to ask Sophie a question.
And I would add
Yep.
to add to Jeff's comment. And I don't know if Sophie wants to add something. Is I think the applicants for these new TLDs need to identify they need to use a registrar. That requirement's not going to go away, but the registrar becomes more of a partner with their sales channel as opposed to being the sales channel. And so they need to identify what registrars are willing to work with that kind of sales channel and business model. And I have one more lessons learned, but I'll
Okay. Yeah, no, Tom, let's
do it
now.
I want to ask Sophie if she wants to add anything before I jump to my last point.
I want to ask Sophie about dot brands, because there's two, if I can say, two main buckets there, and dot brands is the other one. Seen a number of dot brands apply in the last round. And Sophie, what's your sense about dot brands applying in this round?
Yeah, so I think one thing at least that I'm seeing that's going to be different this time with dot brands is we're going to be seeing more brands coming in with a definitive, this is how we want to use it. We've got a bunch of names we want to start using on day zero. Essentially, I think that's the biggest one. I think it's going to be more people going less fear mongering about, oh, we have to run out and get that just in case. I think it's going to be more, we have something we specifically want to use. This is how it fits into our overall business strategy, and we want to move forward with it. Now, that's not to say there's not going to be some of that still FOMO feeding the dot brand applications, but I do think there's going to be more going into it. And I think also we saw, because with the last round, there weren't dot brands as a concept at the time of application. It wasn't a recognized business model as such. Spec 13 hadn't been drafted. Where we are now, we now have that language for Spec 13. People see the parameters for how they can play with it and what they can and can't do, and how they need to be setting things up. So I think it enables a bit more planning and foresight for how dot brands are going to be participating in the next round.
Thank you, Sophie. Tom, let's circle back to number 3, lesson learned.
All right. So this is a question. I'm going to ask you a question first of you people, fellow panelists, and Zach. What is the biggest brand TLD? Zach, Jeff, Sophie, what's the biggest brand TLD?
How do you define biggest? Because I would say,
the most valuable, the most popular brand TLD.
I couldn't answer popular, but I know there's brands like KPMG that have completely turned over to it. So to me, that's huge, right? For a brand to change their primary corporate sites to .kpmg, that is great. But other than that, because brands aren't measured in number of registrations, so that would be my answer.
In terms of actual numbers, I'm not sure I could actually tell you that off the top of my head, but I will say that, again, I'd agree it's more the use of in terms of prolific registrations in .brands. I know there's quite a few car brands that have been using them quite a lot. So I think in the Audi family, again, there are a few different ones that have quite a few thumbs there. And then I believe there's a decent number in Sky and also .aws, and .aws I think are using it. Someone read my mind. This is scaring me. They have in the chat, they use it as a mapping on a more technical level with the IP, again, as well it is, but they use it more on a technical level, and I'm not going to attempt to describe that properly and embarrass myself completely. But yes, I would say .aws would be up there.
All right, Tom, what's the trick question, as Bill
It is a trick question. Sorry, guys. The biggest brand TLD is .com by far. So, and this is important because every TLD is a brand, right? And if you don't proactively define the DNA and the positioning of your brand, the market may or may not do it for you. But so many of the TLDs that launched the last round, they could not explain how it was different from .com. And that you ask them, what's the brand? They say, go to Webster's Dictionary and look up the definition. That is not branding. And so I think a critical success factor is going to be how this new TLD string is going to be different from .com, which is still the dominant market player, even after 600 plus TLDs have launched into the namespace. So I think that's a fairly critical question that every investor needs to ask before you investigate a TLD.
I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the contention sets and objections. And this has been raised by a few people in chat. And, I'm actually just going to read one of the questions out to set the stage for it. This is from David. If multiple parties apply for a TLD, what happens to their application fee for the unsuccessful parties? Do they get refunded? If their alternative pick is not available either, can they pick a second alternate? So, Sophie, maybe you could start, and Jeff and Tom, please feel free to jump in. Tell us about how these contention sets work between competing applications.
Okay, so there's a few different levels to it. And I saw another question in chat that sort of alluded to this. So there's the one model that Tom was talking a little bit about as well, community TLD. So in this round, as with the last one, there's community priority evaluation. And that means if you can meet the criteria to a sufficient level, you will get priority for that string in a contention set. So for instance, I'm going to .bingo, for example. Bingo communities, they all want .bingo, for instance. Someone actually coordinates and organizes that community and says, yep, where's this institution, we want to apply for it. They go forth and they set it out. Now, if there are some other people who go, you know what, bingo is a good one because it's a fun term, I want that for a TLD as well, but they don't have the community backing, or they try for CPE, community priority evaluation, and are unsuccessful. Basically, they're relying on that first one to sort of trip up somewhere else and not be successful for it. So if you win CPE, then you get to have it free and clear. However, if we're going back to this bingo example, which I think I'm going to end up regretting, and you have
It's a
three.
scary thought that there's a world community of bingo players.
I mean, cruise ships. So when you've got 2, 3, 4 different applications for .bingo coming forward from people, they're all considered generic. They don't have CPE. The way that can get resolved is there's an ICANN auction of last resort, and essentially that's an auction where the proceeds get put in a certain pot by ICANN, which is their grant program they've just set up, and the person who puts the highest bid forward wins. Now there's bid credits as well for applicant support, which is another level of complexity, but basically auction of last resort, no private contention resolution. In terms of this alternate strings, that's restricted to just one alternate string. So you don't get to have an infinite number of alternate strings. So you start off at the beginning, and at the time you submit your application, they ask, would you like to have a backup? So Jeff gave his example with Neuman and Jeff Neuman as his backup string. And so you can't create a new contention set, or you can't go and join an existing one. So if, for example, Jeff applied for Neuman and then 3 other people had applied for Jeff Neuman, he wouldn't be allowed to switch his string to join that Jeff Neuman contention set. So I'll stop and I'll let Jeff and Tom add to that.
Please, and Jeff, maybe you could talk about, in particular, what kind of dealing can go on between applicants, or can it not?
Well, the hope is that there won't be dealings between applicants in fact, there's right now in the latest version that's out for comment, there's a prohibition on applicants actually communicating with each other once the application is submitted. So once you find out you're in a contention set with someone else, you're not allowed to even talk to them, except if you have like an ongoing business relationship and like you can talk to them about that kind of stuff, but not anything about your application. How that's going to be monitored, I don't know, right? I mean, that's very difficult to monitor, but it is very typical if in like government sponsored requests for proposals to have that prohibition on communicating with each other. So, there are some loopholes that I see in the rules. Some of us have made those comments to ICANN to try to close them up, but if they don't close those loopholes up, come to me and I'll help you.
And Jeff, in chat, you talked about a partial refund. Can you
Yeah.
just put that in? Let's just talk about it briefly in case people didn't see it in the chat.
Yeah, so there's a refund schedule throughout the application process. So if you apply for a string and then when the strings are revealed, you're like, I can't use my alternate string. I can't compete with the other 5 applicants. I'm going to bow out. You get a higher percentage back, and I think it's still 65%, I think is the proposal. But if you lose that contention set, for example, I think as the one that was from the question, you could get 35% of your application fee back, even if you make it all the way through and you fail. So one of the other differences I was going to cover in this is that the application is not, for the most part, evaluated until after the contention resolution set is figured out. So there are things like background checks or finances, that these due diligence items. ICANN won't do that until the ICANN auction has taken place, unless, of course, you're the only applicant. So let's say you fail, you somehow win the contention set, but you fail the application evaluation, which I can't imagine happening, but let's say it did, then in theory, you could get like a 25% refund back. So there are some refunds built into it. But Sophie had talked about the application fee of $227,000. probably something we should all talk about, know about, is really the cost to apply for a new gTLD and run a new gTLD are so much higher, right? So if you think you can apply for 227 and win the TLD and then hopefully sell it off to someone else, you're probably in for a rude awakening. There's a lot of other costs in getting the application done, responding to public comments, because once you submit your application, there's a public comment period. So anyone from the public can make any comment they want about your application, and people do, as we all know. There's also an objection period. So let's say you apply for a mark that matches a trademark, apply for a string that matches a trademark. One can oppose that. A trademark owner can oppose it under a legal rights objection, and that's going to cost you more money if you lose. And that one's a loser pays. But if you lose, you also lose the string. There's governments can make comments in the form of early warnings, which basically saying, hey, if you proceed with it, we don't like this for some reason. If you proceed, you may get advice against that string, as what happened. I think RF is talking about .amazon. They received government advice, which meant that in the last round there was much more that if you got advice against you, there's a presumption you wouldn't go forward. You can't go forward. Amazon defeated this, and for the next round, it's not a presumption that you'll be not allowed to go through. But if the governments issue advice, it's an uphill battle for you and a lot of cost for you to try to defeat that government advice. And you better come up with some great reasons and some great ways to address the government concerns. So the application fee of $227 is just one of, and may even be the smallest fee you incur when you apply.
Thank you, Jeff. Excellent point.
So Zach, I got a question for Jeff and Sophie.
Yeah.
We're all right now, everyone rightly so is focused on when the application window will open. But if you apply for a string with no contention set, no objections, what's the soonest do you guys think we'll see the next TLD delegated from the upcoming round?
And I could take first stab because we've been asking ICANN to produce kind of like, and they have in this last comment period, there's a document called the application lifecycle or lifecycle timeline. So once all the applications get submitted and they're final and strings have been revealed and confirmed, there's going to be a reveal day, or sorry, a draw. So basically to figure out in what order are they going to be applied for. So let's say, there's 2,000 applications. Obviously, you can't review all those applications at once. So you got to put them in batches and you'll get a priority number. So you might be number 200 or 500, 1,000. But let's say you're number one, right? And because this is your question, let's say you're number one, there's no contention. ICANN says 18 months from application closing to delegation is the soonest that you could probably expect to be delegated in the root. Now, delegated doesn't mean ready to launch because, as you know, and others, lots of work has to be done on marketing. And so it could be in the root, sure, in 18 months, but realistically, the soonest, probably 2 years before you see any kind of real launch. So it's 2 years from April 2026.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with
Tom,
Jeff on that one. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sophie. You agree with Jeff.
Yeah,
2
that's
years.
all I've got to say. Yeah,
In
probably
the
about
best
2
case
years.
scenario. And so
Perfect
let's talk about
world.
worst case. What about worst case scenarios?
There are still
In fact,
there are TLDs from the last round that haven't launched yet, Zach.
Yeah. So .web,
Yeah.
right? If there's litigation or I'll call use of an ICANN accountability mechanism, it's an arbitration, but essentially it's litigation. It can go on for a long period of time. And as Tom said, there's a few of them, .web being one of them, .merc, I think another, that it's been 13 years now and they're still not in the root. So that's worst case scenario.
And
Well,
Arif mentioned that
they're in the
go
root
ahead.
with one domain name, right? NIC dot whatever. But there's dozens that haven't launched yet, right? From Amazon to I think Google might have a few. They're still coming. So they'll be coming out over the next 3 years while we're waiting for this next round to happen.
Yeah, Arif mentioned that interesting case with Amazon and how there was an objection to the application from Amazon Basin countries. Is that right?
Yeah,
Sophie, Jeff, Tom, yeah.
well, I think I can talk about that. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
Sophie can,
Okay.
because for different reasons. But yeah, so there was GAC advice filed against the .amazon string by a few of the governments in the Amazonia region, that their objection was that this is our name. What I'm saying, the country said, this is our name. You shouldn't be allowed to use it for any purposes, certainly not for a corporation. That went back and forth for years, and .amazon was eventually awarded to Amazon. They had to make some concessions and to reserve some names for the Amazonian region. But yeah, if you're looking to apply for a string that just happens to be a geographic area in the world, that's something that can happen. There were also government objections to Islam for religious reasons. There was government advice against GCC for the Gulf Corporation countries.
Yeah.
So yeah, the governments absolutely can file advice against certain strings. So do look to see whether your string happens to match any geographic area and try to prepare for that.
So this is like pretty incredible when you think about that. There's going to be all these applications. I want to talk about the volume anticipated applications momentarily, but governments will be poring over the published list of strings that are being applied for and deciding which ones are going to sic the bureaucracy on to make objections on. Then there's going to be all kinds of community groups and trade associations and whatever all over the world. They're going to have their shot, and then we have ICANN stakeholders. They're going to be able to make the public comments and everything. This sounds like a very, very involved process. This isn't just like getting your driver's license renewed, is it?
No, and ICANN's history, there'll be something they haven't thought of yet, and that will delay the board till they try to explore those new
Right.
issues.
That's a great point, Tom.
And
we're just worried about things we know about. What about things we don't even know about? Yes.
right. I mean,
Right.
I could certainly
Yeah.
see that, some of the terms that have been around since, that may have been created or popularized since the last round, like in the Web3 space, for example, there have been these alternate spaces that have launched, and some investors on this call I know may have some names in that alternate space. Nothing's preventing anyone from applying for any of those strings in this next round, and they will. And if you're thinking about applying for one of those strings, you might expect or want to expect that there are going to be some battles there between those that may have previously launched an alternate space and those who want the space in the DNS. So that's something else it's probably, you could foresee that and have to have a lot of expense for that.
But
So
that's also an opportunity, by the way. And let's take an example. I know Bill's just on, so I'll pick on Bill Friedman from Unstoppable. So Unstoppable has running stuff like .crypto, .wallet, etc. They may well certainly apply for this .crypto, but let's say they don't get it. Maybe they're outbid by someone else. They still have a community of users who they could offer up to the winning registry operator and say, look, I've got all these users. They essentially pre-registered, so to speak, and we'd like to run some sort of pioneer phase or limited registration phase, and I'll give you access to that community. And so I think the Web3 communities are forced to consider an opportunity to consider. It's interesting. A lot of them are dot brands, and again, if another disappointment with the last round is dot brands really did fully utilize their space, but these dot brands have loyal customers, fans. Think dot Swifties for Taylor Swift, or dot Hogs for uh, the motorcycle company, or even Coinbase, Metabase. There's some MetaMask. There's like some great brands that have communities, and even if they don't get their target TLD, they could still make a deal with the registry operator. Like I said earlier, they're essentially an association that the registry could partner with, and try to onboard the members of their community into that TLD.
So Sophie just mentioned in the chat about what happens to auction proceeds. Can I ask you just to explain it to all of us in case people aren't following in the chat?
Sure. So I'll
Yeah.
go, because the original question, there were two parts. One, there was about the legal fees. So one, that legal risk fund, that's part of that 227,000 application fee that ICANN considers. Now, so that money, that's for dealing with all the legal fights. Now, the
So
actual,
sorry, that portion of the application fee is earmarked for ICANN defending itself?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a portion of the application fee that's set aside for ICANN to defend itself. That's built into the 227,000. Now, the rest of it from those ICANN auctions of last resort. And this is what we saw from the last round, because again, the auctions of last resort, they popped up. Where are the funds going? The funds were put into a separate pot that was separate from ICANN. It couldn't be used for ICANN operations, things like that. It's separate. And as part of that, you might remember, for those of you that have been involved or participated at ICANN on and off, an auction proceeds working group. And that group set up the framework for how to disperse the funds that were collected from the auctions of last resort from the last round. And so that's where some of the private resolution
Do you
concerns
happen to
came in.
recall? Do you happen to recall how many millions it was? Anyone?
Well, I know there's at least 135 in there. As a starting point, I think it's closer to 200.
Yeah, it's close to
Um,
200. Yep.
Yeah. So what's happened now is this fund, it's the group, this auction proceeds group, they decided, okay, these could be put out as grants for people who can apply to this particular fund and say, yep, we've got something to improve the security and stability, resiliency of the internet. Can we have some money? Actually a third party reviews that and says yes or no, and then they're either successful or not. So the first part of that is I think they should be getting close to announcing who's actually got the first round of grants, and presumably the funds from the next lot of auctions of last resort will go into that fund as well. So it is separate, it's away from ICANN, but no, it doesn't go straight into ICANN legal.
It is time for the lightning round, folks. The lightning round is where I ask you for your best guess about how many applications there will be in this next round. So put on your thinking caps, and everyone in the chat, and we have now 44, we had as many as 50 people before. Think about what your best guess is for how many applications, because we've heard, in the industry press that, dot brands are dropping theirs, they've lost interest. And, we heard from Tom, a lot of TLDs that were won haven't even been delegated and aren't operational. But yet there's, on the other flip side, there's all this excitement going on. So let's start with you, Tom. What's your best guess about how many applications we're going to get?
Yeah, and just for reference, last round, there were over 1,800 with about 1,100 unique strings. We've heard Nova saying they're going to do over 200 strings. Short Dot says they'll do over 100 strings. I think we'll see the same number, maybe a little less.
So about 1,800 is your guess?
1,800 with, maybe 1,100 uniques.
All right, Camila, make a note of that. We're going to circle back in first quarter, second quarter of 2026 to see how our estimates went. Jeff, what's your best guess?
Well, Todd took my number on the chat, 2123. No, I'm kidding. Mine was 2,400.
2,400. So you're seeing an increase from the last round. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, before a couple months ago, I would have said less, but seeing some of the groups make announcements, 2,400.
Sophie.
I'm probably going to be a little bit more conservative than both of them, but I'm probably closer to Tom's. I'd be putting it sort of the 1,600 range, given on the number that saying we want to back these numbers. That would be my guess at the moment.
All right. So if there's any last questions anyone wants to put to chat, we'll address those now. But I think this has been a terrific, informative session. I'd love to do it again sometime as matters progress. So just going to give each of you an opportunity to share your quick thought about the next round, summary of your thoughts about the next round. Sophie, we could start with you.
Okay. I think that applications are going to be a lot more coordinated. We're going to see less scattergun approaches from objections. I think there's going to be more cohesion sorted out before the application round starts. That's my guess.
Thank you. Jeff.
Well, my first bold prediction is that it will launch on time, which is which is saying a lot given how long it took, how many delays there were back in 2011 and 12, or 10 and 11. So I think I agree with Sophie. I think those that apply now are going to be more realistic. I think objections will also hopefully be more realistic and won't try to hopefully take advantage of just the accountability mechanisms, but we'll see. And yeah, I mean, it's if anyone's thinking about applying, just find someone who knows what they're talking about on the process. There's a lot of there's a lot of people out there saying that they support new gTLDs and that they're qualified to help. Just make sure you know about the people you're working with and they can help walk through this process.
Thank you, Jeff. Tom.
So again, I think that the untapped opportunity here is to get domain names into the hands of individuals. That's a massive market, 10 times the current size of our zone files. I think that what that means is that while we're waiting for ICANN, every existing legacy ICANN TLD are going to be adding new features. They're going to be Web3 enabling their ICANN domain names. You'll be able to tokenize any TLD in the ICANN root. And so that'll be exciting to watch while we watch paint dry over at ICANN.
Thank you very much, Tom. Well, this has been an exceptional treat. You guys, as Lauren said in the chat, are rock stars. These are the best and brightest from the ICANN community who know absolutely everything. They know the things that we didn't even know existed about this program. This is terrific. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience with us. We will do this again sometime. Back to you, Camila. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you to Sophie, Jeff, Tom, so much for taking the time and joining us. And thank you to all of our attendees. As Zach said, a wonderful session, and we hope to do it again. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.